Hey there, and welcome to Decoding the Digital Lab with CSALS, the podcast that offers guidance and valuable insights on data driven LIMS and ELN projects. I'm your host, Megan Pettyjohn, and in this series, we're highlighting real world applications and management of LIMS and ELN systems. In today's episode, we'll be discussing LIMS strategies and AI readiness. I am very excited to welcome Luc Duijsens. Luc has a unique background combining a master's in chemistry and a master's in data science. He has spent the last 7 to 8 years working extensively with LIMS and ELN systems and has hands-on experience with multiple projects. Today, Luc will share his thoughts on LIMS project landscape, offer tips for selection processes, and walk us through some considerations for implementing a LIMS. Plus, we'll discuss how to enhance those systems by looking at AI readiness, legacy data strategies, ELN integrations, and infrastructure options. Hi, Luc. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on the podcast.
It's great to have you. I am so excited to have you on today to share your experience with our listeners. You have touched just about every step of the selection and implementation process, including some enhancements with SAP and such. But your knowledge doesn't stop there. Can you start us off by sharing a quick overview of your professional background?
Yes, so I at the moment lead the global digital quality operations in a medium-sized pharma company where we drive basically a LIMS and ELN-based transformation across multiple sites of the network. My focus is really on turning the compliance of digital frameworks into efficiency gains, because you see that this is sometimes not happening. And we also try to harmonize and build a scalable lab and also this lab excellence. And so my background is mostly coming from medical chemistry. As you mentioned before, I have a master's in chemistry, as well as a master data science, which was more recently acquired, where I also then use the data we generate in the lab to really come to an efficiency gain.
Reflecting on your LIMS usage, what has been the biggest challenge and the greatest reward of maintaining and evolving a highly customized LIMS environment?
So the biggest challenge for me is really managing the complexity without building a lot of technical debt. So in a highly customized LIMS, what you usually have that if you have a small change, it can impact basically a lot across all of your workflows, across your interface, across the master data strategies, across your validation of the system itself. And that's exactly why documentation is really key. So it's something that needs to be done from the beginning. Without a clear and living document, where basically documentation is growing with the system as it's deployed in different sites, you see that the system becomes fragile. There's no more ownership. You don't understand why knowledge or certain decisions were made. We see that also that then if there is a change or is a backtrack of a certain requirement that is no longer documented, it will be just trapped in some people's heads. So it's one word against the other. And this also really hinders actually your scaling or upgrading capabilities of the system as well. So basically we started to manage risk instead of progress in that part. And the greatest reward is when this customization is done in a proper disciplined way, where it's documented in the correct ways, where you can see it as a basically special add-on. It's then really something that is there and it can also usable and reusable for the system. And especially in ELN projects, that reusability is something you're really looking for. You don't want to keep building the same, let's say, functionality over and over again. And important is that it's then governed after. So once that is then built such a capability, that also this integrity of that capability is maintained by, for example, having a document and when there's changes made to also then making that changes in the documentation itself. And this also really helped us basically build a so-called core model where we have one LIMS model that we are deploying across the different sites. And even though ideally you start this documentation process from the start, as I mentioned, this is of course in most legacy systems not the case, but it's never too late to start such a documentation and to really also retrofit then this documentation back to the old system as if you have it already today. And that's something what we had to do because our system was not documented in an extensive way, and we start now backtracking the documentation part of that.
Having worked with multiple LIMS, can you share some key differences you've observed?
So I worked with LabWare for most of my time with the LIMS systems. I also have some experience in LabVantage. And what we see basically here is LabWare is, let's say, the Android under the phones, because you really can customize a lot. You have a lot of flexibility on the UI, on the functionality of the system. Where LabVantage and recently also with their cloud edition of that, it's more streamlined. So there's less flexibility. It's more like the iPhone. You buy it out of box, it's working. For that out of box process, it might be that you have to adapt to your processes a lot more with, for example, LabVantage and LabWare. But in general, they all do the same functionalities. It's just a matter of how well you are able to adjust those systems to your needs, as well as how flexible, let's say, is your process according to or adapted to the system, let's say. And it also, as I said already, in the UI, it looks different. So LabWare for me also looks a lot more modern. It's a more visual software, while LabVantage is basically getting it from the simplicity of the UI, where it has this tram-line system where you have the different tram stops, as they call it, where you can basically follow your process in a very simple way, but it usually is then not as visually pleasing as you have, for example, in LabWare.
What practical advice would you offer an organization that will be selecting a new LIMS platform?
So the basic start is here for me really, what is your future operation model? What is the kind of processes you need to cover? Really make that analysis of what is our process, what is our process needs, what is what we like to cover before you start with selecting a vendor. Because even though you might select a vendor, okay, it has the most beautiful UI or it has the cheapest price or whatever the criteria might be, if it doesn't fit your process, you're either going to have to standardize your process a lot more to this new software, or you might not have the flexibility you want for. So what we always try to advise is that you start with the process gap analysis. You make this analysis and see then, okay, which vendors have a good fit gap ratio to what your needs are. And it's really a balance basically between, let's say, the needs. For example, do we need multi-site? Do we need inter-site or cross-site functionalities? To really understand what is the regulatory need. Are we operating under FDA or under GMP, under GXP kind of conditions? Are we operating maybe under an ISO? So it gives a lot of different requirements that you would have to take into account. The selection process itself, it is a process. So it's also, if you make a decision and you have not yet fully committed to that, you can still change. It's not that you get stuck. So once you have tried the ecosystem and you see it's not working, that you also still have the ability to switch. It's not that you have now invested maybe a few months to go more detail on one system, that automatically you have to continue with that system as well.
Very good advice. Yeah, some people might feel like, oh, I've put so much energy and effort into this already. I just have to keep going forward with it.
Yeah, and also one of the things that is, let's say, the main struggle that I usually see when you have bought such a system is that then the master data that comes, so the master data task that's associated with the LIMS system or with ERP systems or CDS systems, for that matter, it's always the master data that's going to drive how well, let's say, the adaptation can be of that system to whatever you're implementing it for. So the real win is not choosing the system itself; it's really to have a system that you can adapt your process to.
So, you recently launched an ELN project. What is the single most important lesson learned during that process of integrating the ELN with your existing customized LIMS setup?
So we started a project with ELN basically as a, let's say, technical add-on. So it was just something small, okay, small project, a quick win. That is not the truth. So the ELN as a module and ELN as a kind of concept of way of working, because you're working digitally, it's actually its own real project, and it's quite, you should really basically treat it the same way as you bought the LIMS system. It should be a complete project where you go over all the requirements, you make the dedicated designs, you go over the documentation and the governance from day one, really to make sure that you track all your requirements in the proper way. And for example, we had in the company, as you mentioned, we had recently a launch with the solution as a test. And that really took quite a long time. We had took about 3 years to fully integrate end to end this process, and that came because we came from the highly customized LIMS system. We had very deep site specific logic for this, so we had to really deep dive on the site local level. What do they need? The complexity was also not just in the interfacing itself; it was just in general the underlying business process, business rules, and this master data alignment afterwards as well. So we always say they have as rules, but there's mostly, for most companies, also a lot of exception to those rules. And to know all those exceptions, to be able to program those in, that really takes a lot of time. And we saw that really slowed down our process. If it's one key takeaway that we had from that project, is really to invest early in sharing, let's say, the integration blueprints of what is really the system, the ecosystem looking like after we built that out.
Yeah, key point. just reiterating what you said earlier, tracking your user requirements from the onset, treating it like it's its own project, not just this add-on module. I think that is fantastic advice. Beyond the technology itself, what is one non-obvious process or best practice you implemented or discovered within your QC global infrastructure that significantly streamlined lab operations or improved data reliability?
So for us, it was surprisingly indeed the biggest learning lesson was not even technical. So we indeed, as you also nicely asked, it's beyond the technology itself. And what we noticed is was a miscommunication or a lack of communication between the different stakeholders. So we, of course, are having a QC stakeholder. We want the lab to be digitalized. And you also have a quality assurance that cannot be forgotten. They need to kind of inform you, okay, what you are trying to build, is that even regulatorily acceptable or not? Is it following the guidelines? Is it following the local regulatory requirements as well as our IT teams? So our IT teams are not locally sitting, so they are having different time zones. They have not the same knowledge of the process as we had today. And there's basically where we also saw that we started getting a lot of issues based on communication. So we restarted then a proper governance structure where we had then really weekly steer committees meetings where we then really went through, okay, this is what we stand, this is what the decisions are that need to be made, and then also who can make those decisions. So sometimes the decision was not with the business unit, it was with IT. Can we deploy that? Yes or no? Can we go this way or no? And only by improving actually that communication, we could also speed up our project and really, let's say, adhere more to that timeline as well in the end. Because there's about a lot of parties involved, and to bring them all under one meeting once a week where they know exactly what to expect. And it really helps you actually to the structure also the way forward and really keep track of your, let's say, KPIs or of your way of working, let's say.
Are there any surprising pro tips or hidden features you found in the LIMS platform that your team or other users were thankful to learn about, um, which you would share with other LIMS users or listeners today?
Yeah, so specific maybe to LabWare as well, but you heard me a lot today talking about this as master data discipline. So it's something I really like as a word. And what we've seen is that especially in systems where you can customize, if it's your LIMS, if it's your CDS, does not matter. What we see if the different levels of your master data are not governed in the correct way. For example, you push everything to the local sites. Local site gets to make their own master data. You will have too many differences between the different sites. If you put everything on global, you make a bottleneck on the global level. So that's also not possible. So you have to really balance carefully what data do we give, let's say, to the end user, and what data do we keep maybe in IT, which we keep on the global levels to kind of make sure that we keep the master data set as small as possible. So you don't want, for example, an assay analysis to be 10 times in your system when you only need it actually once. What we also saw, and that was really interesting as well, that we used very tight naming conventions. So it's something we introduced about 2 years ago. I really start to use naming conventions that also it's really clear what is global master data, what's local master data. For example, a balance name would always start with BAL, so it's clear it's going to be a balance. That's what I'm looking at. So when I'm looking and querying the system later, you have also really that availability where to say, okay, a query for the balances, and I find all my balances back in that system. And for the power users and admins, one thing that I really always liked and really we got a lot more into is that you have the ability to really set up this views and site-specific logic without compromising that global logic as well. So you have a lot of subroutine possibilities, for example, in LabWare specifically, to start giving the end user a different experience, but still the same logic behind it in the end as well.
Speaking of naming conventions, a future project of yours is to make legacy data AI ready. Can you elaborate on the goals for this project and the benefits you expect for the lab?
So our goal with making this legacy data AI ready was really to shift it from being historical archive that you have somewhere dusting, nobody looking at it, to really start using it also in the practical terms. So really by harmonizing the product names, by harmonizing analysis names, we could really clean up our system quite significantly. And we try also to, with that kind of cleaning action, to bring more standardization within the process itself. And afterwards, when you have such a clean data set that's very structured, it's a lot easier to import that into any AI kind of functionality. Even if it's not AI, we also had it, for example, a Power BI dashboard that you can build out of that data, because the data is more structured. You have the ability to really go ahead and make it more easier to build or use that visualization as well. because also there again, AI is only as good as the traceability that we have in the data itself. So if the traceability is not lacking, then your AI cannot really predict the patterns that you're looking for. And for us, one of the main use cases actually is to start, for example, looking more at the OOT trends, what is out of trending of what my expected results are. Do I have, for example, in winter and summer, different production results? Can we predict for those to really kind of come more to a better, let's say, AI-ready predictions as well from that data?
Another future project of yours is to upgrade your LIMS for various reasons, one of them being the rebalancing of configured versus customized code. We've covered customization versus configuration in a few of our other podcast episodes, but it would be great from the end user to hear it from you, how you view each within your LIMS.
So for me, configuration and customization is a bit like the cooking. You have the configuration, which is just using the recipe. You take the different options you have. You can season it to taste. So it's basically in your master data, you're going to adjust the already present data fields and use that to kind of tailor the way the system behaves. Where the customization is really when you start writing your own recipe, you make your own sauce, this kind of things. You really start making your own subroutines, you make your own logic within the system. And what I've seen is that if you make such customizations, if it's not documented well, it has a very hard handover. So if this person who built that or the team who built that no longer exists or they no longer support that, you all of a sudden lose a lot of knowledge regarding how your system is behaving. And what we've seen, and it's also the aim with our upgrade, is that when we are bringing in those custom recipes, that at least those are tracked very well, that also these recipes are in a space and behaving in a space where they're not influencing our main menu, so that we still have a customization, but we're not customizing the core of our system itself. And we, from the end user perspective, will notice not that much, because in the end user is seeing the process, and the process either works or doesn't work with what they are doing. And what we do expect when we are bringing such a standardization in the system is that we also have a lot easier steps to standardize the process across different sites, because there is less customization that would support, let's say, local driven processes if they're not part of the so-called configuration of the system.
Regarding your future LIMS upgrade path, what are your goals for on-prem versus cloud? For example, weighing pros and cons of both with your specific situation, infrastructure cost, data security.
Yeah, so this is a bit hard to answer right now. So our LIMS upgrade is actually looking in like 1 to 2 years only. So we do not know the state of cloud, we do not know the state of the systems and the maturity that they have then. We're also still
True.
evaluating. So our mindset is quite pragmatic, I would say, and risk-based. So on-prem give us the familiarity that we have, as well the control, and we know how it functions, let's say, even with the full-on customizations. While in cloud, there is a lot less, let's say, flexibility when it comes to these customizations, but the scalability is, again, a lot better. So there's a bit for both to say, but we're still really evaluating there. So we do not yet have a clear answer of where we want to go in this 2 years.
We like to ask all of our guests on our podcast one final question, and that is, if you could give one piece of advice or a pro tip to the listeners to help them excel at enhancing their LIMS, what would it be?
So it for me would be that you treat your LIMS as a product, not as a project. You can build small discipline habits where every change basically is tied to a clear business problem, is documented in simple decision log. So you understand, why did we make the decision 10 years ago to go this way, for example, as well as design and try to reuse as much of the system as you can across different sites, across different entities that you're working with, if it's the labs, whatever. As well as one practice that really keeps you upgrade ready is really reducing the technical debt. So really make sure that if you make an enhancement, that they actually scale and not just give you that technical debt in the end.
I love that distinction. Product, not project. That's really a fundamental mind shift that changes how you approach everything from day one. What a fantastic note to end on. Luc, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise today.
Yes, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's a really nice experience as well.
Well, that is all the time we have for today's episode of Decoding the Digital Lab with CSOLs. Please join us next time and hit the follow button if you're enjoying this content. We also have a newsletter that highlights current events on a weekly basis, which is free to sign up for. You can find the link in our episode bio on Spotify or YouTube. Thank you.